Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War News Update, third part there for the 25th of October 2024. Hopefully this will be a lot quicker than my previous video that was gargantuan. This is a military aid video, not a huge amount to cover, but some interesting points. Cancellation of the Ramstein conference reveals Europe's inability to seize a critical opportunity to assert leadership in supporting Ukraine, writes Friedrich Merz, the leader of the Christian Democratic Union of Germany, in his recent op-ed for the Kiev Independent. So he is probably going to be the replacement for Olaf Scholz when they have their elections next year. And he is definitely positioning himself as being stronger in supporting Ukraine. There is talk about that Europe should be providing the red lines for Russia, and North Korea should be a red line. And that should lead to the introduction of things like, or actually he talked about how if Russia strike civilian targets with their missiles, if you continue to do that, we'll allow tourists to go to Ukraine. Okay, you've done that, tourists will go, lift restrictions, etc., etc. All kind of stuff that I think most of us would broadly agree with. So I think he's looking good from the centre-right Christian CDU. He's going to be looking good for better support maybe than Olaf Scholz for Ukraine, if that's what your judgment is on the domestic politics in Germany. So he is, quite strong here. Just going to pop into, fear and a desperate hope of being able to, this is the attack on Olaf Scholz. So we go back a little bit, because although this is going to be a case of him getting some domestic political body blows against Olaf Scholz, I think there is some truth to this. Biden spent much of this year before his withdrawal from the presidential race on a campaign trail. Now he is on a farewell tour. A new president will be elected on November 5th, and if his name is Donald Trump, there will be no slipstream for the Europeans to hide in. The cancelled Ramstein conference would have been a perfect opportunity for Europe to, at long last, take the lead. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz should have shown what the Zeitenwende turning point, which Scholz declared following Russia's invasion, means for Europe as a whole. Together with France and Great Britain, he should have made clear statements to Putin. If you do not end your war of terror against Ukraine's civilian population within 24 hours, they could have said, the range limits on the weapons being supplied to Ukraine will be lifted. Exactly what I was just saying. If that were not enough, it could have been added that Germany would supply Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine to help destroy the Russian army's supply routes into the country. France and Great Britain are already supplying cruise missiles with a range needed to hit Russian army supply lines that are apparently prepared to go down this path. Fear and a desperate hope of being able to portray himself as a peace chancellor shortly before Germany's federal election next year have become Scholz's dominant motives. But, quote, fear is the mother of all cruelty, as Michel de Montaigne, the 16th century French philosopher, put it. French President Emmanuel Macron has no doubt read Montaigne and understands that warning. Instead of being decisively at Ramstein, Scholz had a nice coffee with Biden shortly before the US president was awarded the special level of the Order of Merit of the Federal Republic of Germany. But the award ceremony was a moment that united Great Britain, France, Germany and the US merely in nostalgia, not in defining the decisive action and a sense of purpose which Europe needs today. Indeed, the ceremony recalled nothing of so much as how Germany's government behaved in the years before the fall of the Berlin Wall and reunification, before the division of Europe was overcome, before the war in Ukraine. The old Europe of the Cold War sought comfort in the past and confidence in the solitary US leadership that defined the era. Europeans forging their own decisions were rarely even an afterthought back then. For example, did no one even think of inviting Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk to the meeting in Berlin? And in fact, I think Poland had been feeling a little bit put out by this kind of political machinations and logistics. They were wanting to be privy to the secret annexes in the Ukrainian victory plan, where other nations were, but Poland weren't, and Poland had been an incredibly integral part of the support for Ukraine. Biden's flight back to Washington following the aborted Ramstein conference and the diminished meeting in Berlin's chancellery may have taken an almost symbolic significance in the future. The last Atlanticist US president for a long time bidding farewell to Europe, and the Europeans, without leadership and without the slightest idea of what lies ahead, waving goodbye to him, dreamily reminiscing about earlier times. And I think there is certainly a lot in this. I've talked long about there needing to be a big-time leader in the big nations of Europe to force Europe to coalesce around a strength and a united Europe, but around a single person who can drive that support for Ukraine in a way that Macron was doing to a degree, was starting to do that, and then it all went a bit wrong domestically, politically speaking. But maybe Merz, I don't know enough about Merz, but maybe if he's not actually that person, he's at least kind of priming people to think he's that person. He's trying to be that person, arguably. And German viewers, it'd be interesting if you've got some views on him and what he's like. I won't be a massive fan of the CDU compared to the SDP in terms of general domestic left-right politics, but in terms of strength for Ukraine, I think Scholz is definitely lacking. Now, on this kind of Europe could be taking advantage here and positioning themselves at the forefront of international security and the military-industrial complex, etc., etc., Shashank Joshi is quoting for the Financial Times here. Officials briefed on the discussion say there is no possibility EU militaries could match what the US is providing to Ukraine. Other things being equal, yes, but in longer term, Europeans have agency on defence spending, industry, etc. That last bit is Shashank Joshi sort of disagreeing, saying actually at the moment Europe can't, but you look at their direction of travel in terms of their industrial complex, and you look at their military strategy and wanting to procure 60% of stuff, their military equipment within Europe. Actually, there is a place for Europe to be able to replace the US, but these things don't happen overnight. Quote, officials in the bloc are also deeply concerned that a Trump administration would lift sanctions on Russia. I talked about that in my Geopolitics video, and that I think is a massive concern. It's not just about stopping funding of equipment to go to Ukraine, but stopping the sanctions. That is 50% of this war, in my opinion. That would raise a question of how much economic pressure the EU could maintain on Moscow. Without the US Treasury Department, very little. This is a really big worry that I have. Quote, right now, we are arguing amongst ourselves about how to raise 100 billion euros for defence and whether we really need to, said another EU diplomat. If Trump wins, we'll instead be talking about 1 trillion euros and it won't be optional. Really interesting point here. So there's a lot riding on the US election, and kind of like Merz said, this is the time that the EU needs to step up. Are they missing an opportunity? Is there too much dependence on the US? But without the US, you're not going to remotely be able to get that immediate aid to Ukraine that only the US can provide with their phenomenal stockpiles of certain weapons and their ability to produce things quicker than Europe. Take, for example, artillery shells, 155mm artillery shells, where the US ramping up a production has been much quicker, much more reactive than in Europe. Funnily enough, because of the integration of the private and public sector, but it's the public sector in the US that has meant the public ownership over some of these artillery ammunition plants has meant that they don't need to be interested in making a profit. They can just say, right, we're going to ramp up. It's not about contracts. We're just going to ramp up production. You're going to do it because we own you. We're the government. Do it, type thing. And so they've been able to react more quickly or quicker as a result. UN and partners have allocated $20 million to help vulnerable categories of Ukrainians, according to the Ministry of Reintegration. The categories include in particular orphans, the elderly, and people with limited mobility, and internally displaced persons, or IDPs. Rheinmetall has handed over 20 additional Marder 1A3 IFVs, infantry fighting vehicles, to Ukraine. The delivery was completed at the end of the third quarter of 2024. This brings the total number of combat vehicles delivered directly to Ukraine or in the context of so-called ring exchanges to around 200. That's a lot of Marders, but they are going through those infantry fighting vehicles in places like Kursk particularly quickly. They need as many as they can get. Now, we have another Kyiv Independent article. Kamishin, so he is the former strategic industries minister. He's now the advisor to Zelensky in that context. I think Zelensky's taken him, he probably trusts him an awful lot, and he's taken him into his inner circle. But I have a feeling he's doing similar sorts of things. So he's a top-notch guy. Drone and missile deep strikes into Russia. Ukraine has the know-how, but just needs the money. After months of Ukraine's pleas for permission to strike deep into Russia with Western weaponry, allies appear to have shifted their focus to helping Ukraine develop its long-range striking capabilities. I've talked about this a lot recently, that $800 million package going from the US to Ukraine to do exactly this. I was talking previously how I assumed the West would be doing this anyway, and I wonder how much they have been supporting the indigenous production of long-range weaponry. If they haven't been doing it to the extent that I'd imagined, then that is a real missed opportunity, and they bloody well should have been. Ukraine says it has a know-how to produce much more needed drones as well as missiles for deep strikes into Russia. All it needs is financial backing from Western allies. And I said this, it's been reported previously that there's a 10 billion shortfall between potential and reality in terms of the funding. They've got the capacity, they've got the capability, they just need the funding. Commission, a former Minister of Strategic Studies who has overseen Ukraine's domestic weaponry manufacturing for a year and a half before taking on his new advisor role last month, said Kyiv is asking allies for financial backing to achieve its battlefield-tested innovation and production potential. He spoke after a months-long push by Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials pleading for the US and other allies to approve their use of missiles for deep strikes deep inside Russia, an effort that Kyiv appears to have not given up on, despite the apparent lack of success. Ukraine has so far relied heavily on massive weaponry supplies from NATO members, but Commission said that Ukraine could, on its own funding, produce more sophisticated kit using priceless experience gained through more than 2.5 years of fighting back against Russia's full-scale invasion. Our capabilities are significantly higher than the funding available, so it's a significant amount of money, but we discuss it with our partners, Commission said, declining to disclose the estimate needed. So I talked previously about 10 billion. We've had almost $1 billion, 800 million coming from the US to the Ukrainian coffers for these ends. We quote this from Commission, we proved that we can reach deep inside Russia, and for that reason we believe that funding the procurement of things made in Ukraine is a good move for our partners. His comments also referred to technological advancements made by Kyiv that could be shared with allies in fast-moving future warfare tactics, including the massive use of drones in the air, on the ground and at sea in an asymmetric war where Russia has a conventional firepower advantage. So it's like, you've got stuff to give to us, i.e. loads of money, and we've got knowledge and ideas to give back to you, technological advancements, so on and so forth. Commission said that Ukraine has commitments from allies, including the US, Denmark and Lithuania, to fund the procurement of Ukrainian-made deep strike capabilities. So that's really good. And I talked about how Denmark, but also the other day, how also Lithuania have jumped in on this approach, and obviously the US too. So there's a growing number of allies who are doing this kind of funding. UK Defence Secretary John Healey also said on October 22nd that the country would lend about $3 billion for the production of long-range drones. So there seems to be a lot of money pouring into this sector at the moment. That's going to be absolutely vital for Ukraine to prevail. Just hope that they can ramp up that production in time for it to make a lot of difference. Commission declined to reveal the details of long-range weapons being developed, including whether they would include Ukraine's homemade Trim-2 ballistic missile. Another Ukrainian-developed missile, the Neptune, was used in 2022 to sink the Moskva, the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet based in the occupied Crimean Peninsula. So it's come a long way from making its homemade drones to bring the war to Russia. So interesting stuff there. Now, on that kind of, I'm going to bring something else I was going to talk about much later, further to the front here. So you talk about how Russia have mass, and you overcome mass with precision. So if you're sending more shells at us, then the shells we send back at you need to be more precise. They need to do more damage. ISR, our intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, or ISTAR, intelligence, surveillance, targeting, and reconnaissance, needs to be better so that we are eking out an advantage, making our actions against you far more efficient. But Ulrika Franke here says, well, there's this talking about an article in Foreign Affairs, Battle of Precise Mass. Mass is making a comeback. So it has been in the West with the US, you've seen a move away from mass to precision. I talked about this at the very beginning of the war when they were talking about dumb bombs being dropped from airplanes. Like Russia had 95 of its bombs were dumb. Those are the ones they're turning into guided glide bombs now. So huge stockpiles of dumb munitions. You drop these, or dumb artillery shells where you just fire them, trajectory takes it to there, bosh, there you go. Whereas the US has been working on a kind of 95% precision, 5% dumb. So they will be going for HIMARS, on a dime, hit that target on a dime. More expensive, but less collateral. So, fewer civilians are going to die, better in all, more efficient, etc., etc. Now, it's this idea that there's a false dichotomy. It's not about precision or mass, but a mass precision or a precise mass. Mass is making a comeback, but not at the expense of precision. Indeed, the current age of warfare is collapsing the binary between mass and precision, scale and sophistication. Call it the age of precise mass. And this is, I'm not going to go into the article much, but it's the idea that, drones, you can use masses of drones. You can even start developing these swarms that we've been talking about, whether I think both sides are working on them, swarms of drones that will be cheap, relatively speaking, cheap and precise and pack a good enough punch. That is a scary prospect for war. You've got precise mass. That seems to be where at least some elements of this war are going. Now, reports come out that Iran has reportedly received a license to produce Russia's Sukhoi 30, Su-30s and Su-35 fighter jets. That's incredibly worrying. That's going to protect these factories from being hit by Ukrainian long-range drones, and it will allow the airplane manufacturing to get up to scratch. Russia can't do it, but if Iran can do it, Russia is struggling with components and sanctions and economy, etc., etc. But maybe Iran can do it. But then, of course, Iran should be sanctioned for the same kind of components, you would have thought. But it may, for some reason, be easier for Iran to produce these weapons, these airplanes, and that is a worry for Ukraine, because they're going to find it far harder themselves to hit factories and stop the production of such weaponry. Only 30% of the shells fired by the Kremlin's forces recently were Russian made. So I reported the other day it's 50-50. The Russians are using 50% North Korean ammo. Of the remainder, 60% came from North Korea and 10% were Iranian made, according to Bloomberg. So only 30% came from Russia, 60% North Korea, 10% Iranian. Wow, that's Bloomberg's report there. Pyongyang, capital of North Korea, has sent approximately 8 million rounds since August last year, the analysis showed. About 100 Hwasong-11 missiles, as well as Bullseye 4 anti-tank weapons, have also been detected on the battlefield in Ukraine for the first time. So they're getting missiles. We know that they've got the KN-23 missile, ballistic missile that's being used. This is all very worrying. But the good news, according to Yonhap, the South Korean agency, is that apparently North Korea only have 3 months left of artillery ammunition. I presume that means 3 months of artillery ammunition they can afford to give to Russia. That is good news for Ukraine. We're already hearing that Russia are down to a fire ratio of 2-1. So they're firing twice as much as Ukrainians. And that's down from 7-1 and maybe even more earlier on in the war. That's an incredible closing of that gap, which might have a really tangible effect on a front line. It might mean that actually their attacks aren't getting the close support that they need. The artillery support, combined arms maneuvers, are more challenging for the Russians, and they won't be able to flatten these. At the moment, they seem to be flattening these towns and then moving in and putting their flags up. Now, the flip side is where they're losing out on artillery ammunition, they appear to be gaining in aviation, in guided glide bombs. So they're replacing their use of artillery with the use of guided glide bombs, and that is a challenge that the Ukrainians still haven't overcome. That's their next big thing. Right, South Korea's intelligence service has said that North Korea will send more troops to Russia. They will send more troops to Russia, says Bloomberg. The publication noted the intelligence service is saying that, according to documents, the first group of 1,500 special forces is already being trained in the Russian Far East as part of the deployment of about 10,000 North Korean soldiers. South Korean intelligence documents also provide details on the scale of arms shipments from North Korea to Russia. Pyongyang has reportedly sent Moscow, as we've heard, 8 million North Korean 122 mil or 152 mil shells. So that's all part of the same thing, but it's the idea that they will be sending more troops. That is scary, and exactly what I didn't want to hear, but knew that it would come. And this is another rather scary nugget. Okay, quote here from Washington Post. The Russian site called Sergeyev Posad 6 has been quiet for decades. And in fact, there's a GIF of this out that you can see it develop. It's been quiet for decades, but it had once been a major research centre for biological weapons. Construction of new labs at the Sergeyev Posad 6 is being closely watched by US intelligence agencies and bioweapons experts. US officials and arms control experts noting the secrecy surrounding the military facility say they are worried about how Russia intends to use the new labs. Quote, this is where they weaponized smallpox, Dutzman said. Concerning both because of Russia's history of lying about biological weapons development and its more recent history about lying about producing nerve agents. I'm not sure that sentence made the sense that it should have done. But yeah, they've got a long history of lying about biological weapons development. And Shashank Joshi actually puts a quote in there for a reference to a 2011 Guardian article, a book actually, and it's history about lying about producing nerve agents, a New York Times article there from 2018. They lie about stuff like this. So obviously we don't want to listen to what they say, but it is worrying that they are expanding biological weapons labs. So super worry there. Okay, that's enough from me. Take care, guys. Speak soon.